The letter arrived on a Tuesday, which Ethan would later think was fitting because Tuesdays had always been his unluckiest day. He stood in the post office in Carterville, a town so small it didn't deserve the name, holding an envelope that smelled faintly of lavender. The handwriting was neat, controlled, nothing like Sarah's had been, all loops and flourishes that made every word look like it was dancing. This was different, practical. You gonna open that or just smell it all day? The postmaster, a dried-up man named Cullens, grinned with too few teeth. Ethan didn't answer. He folded the letter into his coat pocket and walked out into the Wyoming wind, which cut through everything it touched. The ranch was 6 miles out, and he rode slow, letting his horse pick the path while his mind worked over what he'd done. 3 months ago, drunk on whiskey and loneliness, he'd answered an advertisement in the matrimonial news. He'd written 4 sentences total, promised nothing but hard work and a roof, and somehow, against all sense, a woman had written back. Her name was Mara Quinn, 26 years old, no family to speak of, currently living in St. Louis but willing to relocate for the right situation. The letter had been so brief it was almost rude, but that was fine. Ethan didn't need poetry. He needed someone who could survive. Sarah had been dead 14 months. The influenza took her in 4 days, and Ethan had spent the time since then trying to figure out how a man was supposed to run 200 acres, manage 12 head of cattle, and not lose his mind when the silence got so heavy it felt like drowning. He'd tried hiring help, but no one wanted to work for a man who could barely pay in anything other than promises. The bank was circling, the land was drying out, and Ethan was 34 years old, too young to be this tired, too old to start over, so he'd written to a stranger. He didn't open the letter until he was back at the house, if you could call it that. 2 rooms, a stone fireplace that smoked when the wind changed, and a roof that leaked in 3 places. Sarah had wanted to add on, make it bigger, maybe put in real windows instead of the oiled paper that let in more cold than light, but that was before. Everything good was before. The letter said she'd arrive on the 14th, 4 days from now. She'd take the train to Cheyenne, then the coach to Carterville, and he was to meet her at the station at 2 o'clock. I don't need much, she'd written, just honesty and a fair chance. Ethan read it twice, then folded it back up and set it on the table. He looked around the room, at the dust, the unwashed dishes, the corner where Sarah's rocking chair still sat like a ghost, and he felt something close to panic. What the hell had he done? The day Mara Quinn arrived, it rained. Not the soft kind of rain that nourished things, but the cold, spiteful kind that turned the roads into rivers of mud and made every step feel like a fight. Ethan showed up at the station an hour early, water dripping off the brim of his hat, and waited. The coach came in late, which didn't surprise him. What did surprise him was the woman who stepped down. She wasn't pretty, not in the way Sarah had been, all soft edges and easy smiles. Mara Quinn was tall, sharp-boned, with dark hair pulled back so tight it looked painful. Her dress was plain gray, travel-stained, and she carried one small trunk like it weighed nothing. But it was her eyes that stopped him. Pale green, hard as river stones, and they looked at him the way you'd look at a horse you weren't sure was broken yet. Ethan Hale? Her voice was low, flat, no warmth in it. That's me, Mara Quinn. She didn't offer her hand. This all there is to the town? Ethan glanced around at the 4 buildings that made up Carterville's main street. Pretty much. Good. I hate crowds. She hoisted her trunk into the back of his wagon without asking for help, climbed up onto the seat, and waited. Ethan stood there for a second, wrong-footed, then got up beside her and took the reins. They didn't talk the whole ride back. The rain let up around mile 3, but the silence didn't. Ethan tried once, asked her about the trip, about St. Louis, about anything, but Mara just looked out at the endless gray-brown land and said, "It's fine." By the time they reached the ranch, the sun was setting, and the place looked even worse than usual. The barn was leaning, the fence was half down. The house sat there like something beaten. Mara climbed down, looked at it for a long moment, then said, "Where do I sleep?" "Inside, there's a room." "Just one?" "2. I'll take the other." She nodded, grabbed her trunk, and walked in without waiting for him. Ethan stood in the yard, rain dripping off his hat, and thought, well, this is going to be a disaster. The first week was worse than he'd imagined. Mara didn't complain, which somehow made it harder. She just moved through the house like a shadow, cooking meals that were edible but joyless, washing clothes in silence, and sleeping behind a door that was always closed. She didn't ask questions, didn't smile, didn't give him anything to work with. Ethan tried. He told her about the ranch, about the cattle, about the plan to expand once the bank stopped breathing down his neck. She listened, nodded, and went back to whatever she was doing. On the fourth night, he couldn't take it anymore. "You planning to talk to me at all, or is this how it's going to be?" Mara was at the stove, stirring something that smelled like beans and not much else. She didn't turn around. "I talk when there's something to say. We're married. There's got to be something." "We're legally married. There's a difference." Ethan felt his jaw tighten. "I didn't bring you out here to be a ghost." "Then what did you bring me out here for?" She turned then, and her eyes were colder than the wind outside. "You needed someone to cook and clean and maybe warm your bed when you got lonely. I needed a place that wasn't St. Louis. We both got what we wanted. That's the deal." "That's not—" He stopped. "What happened in St. Louis?" Her face closed down so fast it was like watching a door slam. "Nothing that's your business." She turned back to the stove, and Ethan knew the conversation was over. But Mara wasn't a ghost. She was something worse. She was capable. Within 2 weeks, she'd reorganized the entire house, patched the roof in 2 of the 3 places, and figured out how to make the fireplace stop smoking. She worked from sunrise to past dark, never asking for help, never slowing down. When one of the cattle got stuck in the north fence line, she grabbed a rope and hauled it out herself, coming back muddy and bleeding from a scrape on her arm. Ethan tried to look at it. She pulled away. "It's fine." "It's not fine. You're bleeding." "I said it's fine." Her voice was sharp enough to cut. "I don't need you hovering." He stepped back, hands up. All right. But he watched her after that. Watched the way she moved, efficient, controlled, like she was used to working alone. Watched the way she flinched when he got too close too fast. Watched the way she stared out at the horizon sometimes, like she was looking for something that wasn't there. One night, she came in late from checking the fences, and Ethan had already made dinner, or his version of it, which was burned salt pork and half raw potatoes. She looked at the plate, looked at him, and something almost like amusement crossed her face. "You're terrible at this." "I know." She sat down, ate it anyway, and for the first time, the silence didn't feel quite so heavy. The trouble started in week 3. Ethan woke to the sound of gunfire. He was out of bed and grabbing his rifle before his brain caught up, running into the main room in his undershirt and boots. Mara was already at the window, shotgun in hand, her face calm. "What the hell?" "Coyotes," she said. 3 of them. They were at the chicken coop." "Did you hit any?" 2. He stared at her. "You killed 2 coyotes in the dark?" "I grew up hunting." She set the shotgun down, finally looking at him. "My father didn't believe in wasting bullets, so I learned to make them count." "Where was this?" Her face went blank again. "Doesn't matter." But it did matter, and Ethan was starting to realize that everything about Mara Quinn mattered. Every scar, every silence, every moment she pulled away. She wasn't just running from something. She was built by it. The next morning, he found her outside, skinning the coyotes with a knife that looked older than she was. Her hands were steady, practiced, and she worked without flinching. "You planning to keep the pelts?" he asked. "Unless you've got a better use for them. We could sell them, might get a few dollars." She paused, looked up at him. "You need a few dollars that bad?" "I need every dollar that bad." Mara went back to her work. "Then we'll sell them." It wasn't much, but it was the first time she'd said we. The children came on a Sunday. Ethan was out mending the fence on the eastern pasture when he heard Mara shout. He dropped the wire and ran, heart pounding, expecting bandits or worse. What he found was Mara standing in the yard, staring down at 2 kids who looked like they'd crawled out of a grave. A boy, maybe 8, with hollow eyes and dirt so thick on his face you couldn't see skin. A girl, younger, maybe 5, clutching his hand like it was the only thing keeping her alive. Both of them were shaking, from cold, from hunger, from fear. Ethan couldn't tell. "They just walked up," Mara said quietly. "Didn't say a word." Ethan crouched down, trying to make himself smaller, less threatening. "Hey, you 2 got names?" The boy stared at him. The girl hid behind her brother. "It's all right," Ethan said. "You're safe here. You hungry?" The boy's eyes flicked to Mara, then back to Ethan. He nodded once. Mara was already moving. "I'll get food." She came back with bread, beans, and water, and the kids tore into it like animals. Ethan watched, his stomach turning. He'd seen starving cattle before, starving men during the war. But there was something about watching children eat like they didn't know when the next meal was coming that made him feel sick. When they finally slowed down, Ethan tried again. "Where'd you come from?" The boy wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "Homestead, 40 miles north." "Where's your folks?" The boy's face went hard, and he didn't answer. Mara knelt down beside them, her voice softer than Ethan had ever heard it. "They're gone, aren't they?" The boy nodded. "How long you been walking?" 3 days. "You got anywhere to go?" The boy shook his head. Mara looked up at Ethan, and in her eyes he saw something he hadn't seen before, something raw and hurting. She stood, pulled him aside, and kept her voice low. "They stay." Ethan blinked. "What?" "They stay. We've got room." "Mara, we can barely feed ourselves." "Then we'll figure it out." Her jaw was set, her eyes fierce. "I'm not sending them back out there." "I'm not saying we send them out. I'm saying we take them to town. Find someone who can—" "Who?" She stepped closer, and her voice dropped to something dangerous. "Who's going to take 2 orphans with no money and no family? You know what happens to kids like that. They get worked to death or worse. I'm not letting that happen." Ethan looked past her at the 2 kids, at the way the girl was holding on to her brother like he was all she had left in the world, and he felt something crack open in his chest. "We don't know the first thing about raising kids." "Then we'll learn." Mara's voice was steady now, final. "They stay, Ethan. That's not a question." He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw something he hadn't seen before. She wasn't asking, she was drawing a line. "All right," he said quietly. "They stay." The boy's name was Thomas. The girl's name was Lucy. And they didn't talk much, which Ethan figured made sense given what they'd been through. Thomas did the work of someone twice his age, hauling water, stacking wood, feeding the chickens without being asked. Lucy stayed close to Mara, watching her with big, solemn eyes. Mara didn't soften exactly, but she made space. She set up a corner of the main room with blankets, taught Lucy how to knead bread, and let Thomas shadow her when she worked the land. Ethan watched it all and tried not to think too hard about what it meant. But the money was tighter now, 4 mouths instead of 2. Winter coming. The bank's letters getting sharper. One night, after the kids were asleep, Mara sat across from him at the table, her hands wrapped around a cup of weak coffee. "I know what you're thinking," she said. "Yeah? What's that?" "That we can't afford this. That I made a choice that's going to bury us." Ethan didn't argue. Mara looked into her cup. "My brother and I, we were those kids once. After our mother died, our father, he wasn't a good man. We had nowhere to go, no one who wanted us. I got out. He didn't." She looked up, and her eyes were raw. "I'm not letting that happen to them." It was the most she'd ever told him. Ethan sat there trying to find the right words, but everything he thought of sounded hollow. "We'll figure it out," he said finally. Mara's mouth twisted into something that wasn't quite a smile. "You don't believe that?" "I'm going to try." She held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded. "That's enough." The first snow came early that year. It started in late October, just a dusting, but Ethan knew what it meant. They had maybe 6 weeks before the real cold hit, and they weren't ready. The barn needed reinforcing. The food stores were too low. The cattle were scattered across the northern pasture, and it would take days to bring them in. Mara worked herself half to death trying to prepare. Ethan told her to slow down, and she ignored him. Thomas followed her like a shadow, learning, and Lucy stayed inside, mending clothes with hands too small for the work. One afternoon, Ethan found Mara out by the fence line, hammering posts into frozen ground. Her hands were bleeding, her face pale with exhaustion. "Mara, stop." "Can't stop. This has to be done." "It can wait." "No, it can't." She swung the hammer again, missed, and nearly fell. Ethan caught her arm, and she jerked away like he'd burned her. "Don't. You're going to hurt yourself." "I'm fine." "You're not fine." You haven't been fine since you got here. His voice came out harder than he meant. You can't save everyone by working yourself into the ground. Her eyes went cold. What would you know about saving anyone? It hit like a punch. Ethan stepped back and Mara looked away, her jaw tight. I'm sorry, she said quietly. That was true? She didn't answer. Ethan picked up the hammer, drove the post in himself, and walked back to the house without another word. That night, the temperature dropped. Ethan woke to the sound of Lucy coughing, deep, rattling coughs that sounded wrong. He was up and across the room before he was fully awake, his hand on her forehead. She was burning up. Mara. She was already there, kneeling beside the girl, her face pale. How long has she been like this? I don't know, just woke up. Thomas was sitting up, eyes wide with fear. She was coughing yesterday. I thought it was just the cold. Mara's hands moved fast, checking Lucy's breathing, feeling her neck, looking at her throat. It's not just a cold. We need to get her fever down. They worked through the night, cold compresses, willow bark tea, anything they could think of. Lucy drifted in and out, her small body shaking, and Thomas sat in the corner, silent and terrified. Around 3 a.m, Mara finally sat back, her face drawn. She needs a doctor. Nearest doctor's in Cheyenne. That's 2 days' ride in good weather. Then we make it 1. Ethan looked at the window, at the snow starting to fall again. Mara, we can't. I'm not losing her. Her voice cracked, just barely, but enough. I'm not. He saw it then. The fear under all that control. Mara wasn't made of stone. She was just better at hiding the cracks. All right, he said. I'll go. We'll go. Someone has to stay with Thomas. Thomas can handle himself for a day. I'm going. There was no point arguing. Ethan saddled both horses while Mara bundled Lucy in every blanket they had. The girl was barely conscious, her breathing shallow, and when they lifted her onto Mara's horse, she whimpered. I know, sweetheart, Mara whispered. I know it hurts. But we're going to fix it. They rode out into the snow, and Ethan prayed to a god he wasn't sure he believed in anymore that they'd make it in time. The ride to Cheyenne was hell. The snow turned into a full storm halfway through, and the wind cut through every layer they had. Lucy's fever spiked, and she started mumbling things that didn't make sense. Names Ethan didn't recognize, places that might not exist. Mara held her close, murmuring things he couldn't hear, and kept riding. They reached Cheyenne 16 hours later, half frozen and exhausted. The doctor, a gray-haired man named Winters, took one look at Lucy and got to work. Pneumonia, he said. Bad, but treatable if they'd gotten her there in time. Ethan and Mara waited in the outer room, neither of them speaking. Mara's hands were shaking. From cold or fear, Ethan couldn't tell. He wanted to say something, anything, but the words wouldn't come. Finally, she spoke. If she dies, she's not going to die. You don't know that. I know we got her here. That's all we can do. Mara looked at him, and her eyes were wet. I can't lose another one, Ethan. I can't. Another one? She looked away. I had a sister once, younger than Lucy. She got sick, and we couldn't. There was no money for a doctor, no way to. Her voice broke. She died in my arms, and I couldn't do anything. Ethan reached out, slow, and took her hand. She didn't pull away. Lucy's not your sister, and this isn't then. We're here. She's going to be all right. Mara nodded, but she didn't let go of his hand. Lucy survived. It took 3 days of medicine and rest, but the fever broke, and she started breathing easier. Dr. Winters said she'd need to stay warm and take it slow, but she'd recover. They rode back to the ranch in silence, but it was a different kind of silence now. Lucy slept against Mara's chest, and Ethan found himself glancing over, watching the way Mara held her, fierce and gentle at the same time. When they got back, Thomas ran out to meet them, his face a mix of relief and fear. Mara handed Lucy down to Ethan and slid off her horse, pulling Thomas into a hug that looked like it surprised both of them. She's all right, Mara said. She's going to be all right. Thomas buried his face in her coat and didn't let go. Winter settled in hard after that. The snow piled up, the cattle huddled together for warmth, and the 4 of them learned how to live in close quarters without killing each other. Thomas taught Lucy how to play a card game he'd learned from his father. Mara taught Ethan how to make stew that didn't taste like boot leather. And slowly, so slowly, Ethan almost didn't notice. The house started to feel less like a prison and more like something else. One night, after the kids were asleep, Mara sat beside him by the fire, mending one of his shirts. "You ever think about what happens after?" she asked. "After what?" "After winter. After we survive this. What then?" Ethan stared into the fire. "I don't know. I've been so focused on just making it through, I haven't thought past that." "Maybe you should." He looked at her. "What about you? You thought past it." Mara's hand stilled. "I used to think survival was enough, just making it to the next day, the next month, but now—" She glanced toward the corner where the kids were sleeping. "Now I think maybe there's supposed to be more." "Like what?" She met his eyes. "I don't know yet, but I think I want to find out." And for the first time since Sarah died, Ethan thought maybe he did too. Spring came late and mean. The snow didn't melt so much as give up, leaving behind mud that swallowed boots whole and a cold that wouldn't quit no matter what the calendar said. Ethan spent most of March trying to account for the cattle they'd lost over winter. 7 head gone, either frozen or picked off by wolves, and the number sat in his gut like a stone. 7 cattle meant $700 they didn't have, 7 fewer reasons for the bank to keep its patience. Mara didn't say much about it. She just worked harder, which Ethan was learning was what she did when things got bad. She'd be up before dawn, feeding the chickens, checking the fence lines, teaching Lucy how to gather eggs without spooking the hens. Thomas shadowed her everywhere, soaking up everything she said like he was afraid she'd disappear if he looked away too long. The kid was smart, scary smart. He'd figured out how to patch the water pump with nothing but wire and stubbornness, and he could read animal tracks better than Ethan could. But there was something wound tight in him, something that didn't trust easy. Ethan caught him staring sometimes, at the horizon, at the door, like he was always calculating the nearest exit. One morning in early April, Ethan found Thomas in the barn, grooming Ethan's horse with more care than the animal probably deserved. "You're good with him," Ethan said. Thomas didn't look up. "My pa taught me. Said a man who can't care for his horse isn't worth much." "Your pa sounds like he knew what he was talking about." The boy's hand stilled. "He did. Right up until he didn't." Ethan leaned against the stall door. "What happened to him, Thomas?" The kid went back to brushing, his strokes hard and precise. "Drank himself stupid one night and decided to fix the roof in the dark. Fell, broke his neck." His voice was flat, like he was reading from a newspaper. "Ma tried to hold things together after that. But the land, it took everything. She got sick last winter, lasted about 2 weeks." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. Sorry doesn't change anything." Thomas set the brush down, finally meeting Ethan's eyes. "I just need to know, are we staying, or is this temporary?" The question landed hard. Ethan wanted to lie, to promise something solid, but he'd never been good at that. "I don't know," he said honestly. Money's tight, bank's pushing, but we're trying." Thomas nodded slowly. "That's more honest than most people are. I appreciate it." He walked out, and Ethan stood there feeling like he'd just failed a test he didn't know he was taking. The letter from the bank came on a Thursday. Ethan read it twice, then a third time, hoping the words would change. They didn't. Final notice. Payment due in full by June 1st or foreclosure proceedings would begin. He had 8 weeks to come up with $900, which might as well have been $9,000. He sat at the table, the letter in front of him, and tried to do math that wouldn't work no matter how many times he ran it. Selling the remaining cattle would get them maybe $400 if they were lucky. The pelts, tools, anything else they could spare might add another $100. That left $400 short, and he had no idea where it would come from. "How bad is it?" He looked up. Mara was standing in the doorway, her arms crossed, her face unreadable. "Bad." She came over, picked up the letter, and read it without asking. When she set it down, her jaw was tight. 900. "Yeah." "By June." "Yeah." She pulled out a chair and sat across from him. "What are our options?" "We could sell everything and walk away with maybe enough to get to California. Start over." "And the kids?" Ethan didn't answer. Mara's eyes went hard. "Then that's not an option. What else?" "I could try to find work." Head to Cheyenne, see if anyone's hiring for the railroads or the mines. Send money back. And leave me here alone with 2 kids and a ranch that's falling apart? You got a better idea?" Mara was quiet for a long moment, her fingers drumming on the table. Then she said, "What about the horses? What about them? We've got 4. We only need 2. The other 2 are young, strong. We could sell them." Ethan shook his head. "Horses won't bring enough. Maybe 100 each if we're lucky. Then we breed them. There's a ranch 40 miles south. I heard about it in town. They pay top dollar for good stock. We get a stallion, breed our mares, sell the foals next spring." "That's a year away, Mara. We've got 8 weeks. "I know." She leaned forward. "But if we can show the bank we've got a plan, something real, maybe they'll extend the deadline. Give us time to make it work." It was desperate. It was a long shot. But it was something. "All right," Ethan said. "We try it." The ranch Mara had heard about was called the Double R, and it was owned by a man named Rake Donovan, who had a reputation for being fair but ruthless. Ethan and Mara rode out on a Saturday morning, leaving Thomas in charge with strict instructions not to let Lucy out of his sight. The Double R was 3 times the size of their place, with a main house that actually looked like a house and barns that didn't lean. Donovan met them in the yard, a big man in his 50s with a gray beard and eyes that missed nothing. "You're the Hale place, aren't you?" he said, shaking Ethan's hand. "Heard you lost your wife a while back. My condolences." "Thank you." Donovan's gaze shifted to Mara. "And you must be the new Mrs. Hale. Heard about you too. Good things, I hope," Mara said evenly. Donovan smiled. "Let's just say people talk. What brings you out here?" Ethan explained the plan, selling 2 horses now, breeding the others, selling foals next year. Donovan listened without interrupting, then walked over to inspect the horses they'd brought. He ran his hands over their legs, checked their teeth, watched them move. "These are good animals," he said finally. "I'll give you $150 for both." It was more than Ethan had hoped for. "Deal." "But," Donovan held up a hand, "if you're serious about breeding, you're going to need a stallion. I've got one I'd be willing to lease. Costs $200 for the season, but the foals will be worth 10 times that if you do it right." 200 they didn't have. Ethan opened his mouth to say so, but Mara spoke first. "We'll take the lease, but we'll need terms. Half now, half after the foals are born." Donovan raised an eyebrow. "That's a risk for me." "It's a risk for everyone, Sean," Mara said. "But we're good for it." Donovan looked between them, then nodded. "All right, half now. But if those foals don't sell, you still owe me the balance." "Understood." They shook on it, and as they rode back, Ethan said, "You just committed us to another $100 we don't have." "I know. And if this doesn't work, then we're no worse off than we already are." She glanced at him. "You got a better plan?" He didn't. The bank wasn't impressed. Ethan rode into Carterville alone the following week and sat across from a man named Horace Brill, who looked at him like he was something stuck to the bottom of a shoe. "Horses," Brill said flatly. "You're asking me to extend your loan based on horses that haven't been born yet. It's a solid plan. Donovan's stallion has good bloodlines, and the market for working horses is strong. Mr. Hale, I don't care about bloodlines. I care about cash. And right now you don't have any." Ethan leaned forward. "Give me 6 months. That's all I'm asking. 6 months to make this work." Brill folded his hands on the desk. "The bank has been patient with you, very patient. But patience has limits. I'm not asking for patience. I'm asking for a chance. You've had chances." Brill's voice was cold now. "Your wife dies, and we don't foreclose. You can't make payments, and we extend deadlines. You bring in a mail-order bride and 2 orphans, and we look the other way. But this is the end of the line." Ethan felt something snap inside him. "What do you want me to say? That I'll walk away? Let you take the land my wife and I built? Your wife is dead, Mr. Hale, and unless you can pay what you owe by June 1st, the land belongs to the bank." Ethan stood up so fast his chair scraped the floor. "You're a real piece of work, you know that?" Brill didn't blink. "I'm a businessman, and business is business." Ethan walked out before he said something that would make things worse. He didn't tell Mara how bad it had gone. Not right away. He needed time to think, to figure out what came next, but the truth was, there wasn't much to figure out. They were cornered, and the only way out was through a door that didn't exist yet. When he got back to the ranch, Thomas was in the yard repairing a section of fence that had come loose. The kid didn't look up, just kept hammering, and Ethan stood there watching for a minute before walking over. "You didn't have to do this," Ethan said. "It needed doing." "Still, you've been working hard, you and Lucy both." Thomas set the hammer down. "Are we losing the ranch?" The question hit like a punch. Ethan wanted to lie, but he'd promised the kid honesty. "I don't know, maybe." Thomas nodded, his face unreadable. "If we do, where do we go?" "I haven't figured that out yet." The kid picked up the hammer again. "Well, let me know when you do." He went back to work, and Ethan felt the weight of it settle on him. This kid, this girl, this woman who'd come out here expecting something better and getting this mess instead. He'd made promises he couldn't keep, and now they were all going to pay for it. That night, Mara found him sitting outside staring at nothing. "Thomas told me," she said. Ethan didn't answer. She sat down beside him. "So we're losing it. Looks like. And you're just going to sit here and accept that?" "What do you want me to do, Mara? I tried. I went to the bank, I made the pitch, and they shut me down. There's no more moves." "There's always more moves." Her voice was hard. "You just have to be willing to make them." "Like what?" She was quiet for a moment, then said, "I've got money." Ethan turned to look at her. "What?" "I've got money. Not a lot, but some. I've been saving since I got here, from selling pelts, eggs, anything extra. It's about 200. Mara, before you say no, just listen. We take my 200, we take what we get from Donovan for the horses, and we pay down enough to buy more time. We tell the bank we'll have the rest by fall. They won't go for it. They will if we make them believe it." She leaned closer. "You go back to Brill. You don't ask. You tell him this is how it's going to be. You put the money on his desk, you look him in the eye, and you make him understand that we're not going anywhere." Ethan shook his head. "That's your money. You earned it. And I'm choosing to use it. For this. For us." She reached out, took his hand. "We're in this together, Ethan. That's what you said. So let me be in it." He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw something he'd been too blind to see before. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was fighting. For the ranch. For the kids. For something that mattered. "All right," he said. "We'd do it your way. Eat." The next morning, Ethan rode back to Carterville with $350 in his saddlebag, Mara's 200, the 150 from Donovan, and every spare dollar they could scrape together. He walked into Brill's office without knocking, dropped the money on the desk, and said, "There's your payment. We'll have the rest by October." Brill looked at the money, then at Ethan. "This is barely a third of what you owe. It's good faith, and it's all you're getting right now. Mr. Hale, this isn't a negotiation." Ethan leaned on the desk. "You want your money? You'll get it. But you'll get it on my timeline, not yours. So you can either extend the loan until October, or you can foreclose and spend the next year trying to sell land nobody wants in a market that's already flooded. Your choice." Brill stared at him for a long moment, then picked up a pen. "October 1st, not a day later. Deal." Ethan walked out feeling like he'd just won a fistfight he had no business winning. Spring turned to summer, and the ranch became a different kind of battlefield. The mares were bred, which meant waiting to see if it took. The garden Mara planted started producing. Not much, but enough to stretch their supplies. Thomas learned how to shoe a horse, and Lucy stopped flinching every time someone raised their voice. It was small progress, the kind you couldn't see unless you were looking for it, but it was there. Ethan found himself watching Mara more than he probably should. The way she moved when she worked, efficient, purposeful. The way she talked to Lucy, patient but firm. The way she looked at the horizon sometimes, like she was still expecting something bad to come over it. One evening, after the kids were asleep, he asked her about it. "What are you always looking for out there?" Mara was mending a shirt by lamplight. She didn't stop working. "Old habit." "From what?" She set the shirt down. "You really want to know?" "I wouldn't ask if I didn't." She was quiet for a long time, her fingers tracing the edge of the fabric. Then she said, "My brother. His name was Caleb. After our mother died and our father started drinking, Caleb tried to protect me. Took beatings meant for me. Stole food when we didn't have any. Made sure I got out when things got really bad. She paused. I left him behind. I was 16 and I ran, and I told myself I'd come back for him when I had money, when I had a plan. But by the time I did, he was gone. No one knew where. Some said he'd headed west, some said he was dead. I've been looking for him ever since. Ethan felt something tighten in his chest. That's why you took the kids. Yeah. You think he's still out there? I don't know, but I can't stop looking. She met his eyes. Does that make me crazy? No, it makes you human. She smiled, just a little. That's more generous than I deserve. I don't think so. They sat in the quiet for a while, and Ethan thought about all the things people carried: grief, guilt, hope that didn't make sense. Mara carried all three, and somehow she was still standing. If he shows up, Ethan said, we'll help him, whatever he needs. Mara looked at him, and something shifted in her expression. Thank you. It wasn't much, but it felt like enough. The trouble came in July. Ethan was out checking the fence line when he saw the rider coming, a man on a black horse, moving fast. Something about the way he rode made Ethan's instincts kick in. He grabbed his rifle from the saddle and rode to intercept. The man pulled up when he saw Ethan. He was young, maybe mid-20s, with dark hair and eyes that looked too old for his face. He wore a gun low on his hip, and his clothes were trail-worn. Help you? Ethan kept his voice neutral. The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Looking for someone. Woman, late 20s, dark hair, goes by Mara Quinn. Heard she might be around here. Ethan's grip tightened on the rifle. Who's asking? Her brother. Everything stopped. Ethan stared at the man, trying to see Mara in his face, and maybe there was something, the shape of the jaw, the set of the eyes. But there was something else too, something that made his skin crawl. She mentioned you, Ethan said carefully. I bet she did. The man's smile widened. Name's Caleb Quinn, and I've been looking for my sister for a long time. Well, you found her. Ranch is another mile that way. I'll ride back with you. Caleb's eyes narrowed. That an invitation or a threat? Take it however you want. They rode in silence, and Ethan's mind was racing. This was what Mara had been waiting for, what she'd been looking for. Her brother, alive here. It should have been good news, so why did it feel like the ground was about to give way? When they reached the ranch, Mara was in the yard, hanging laundry. She looked up at the sound of horses, and when she saw Caleb, she went completely still. Mara, Caleb said, swinging down from his horse. Long time. Mara didn't move. Her face was unreadable, but Ethan could see her hands shaking. Caleb. That all you got to say? No good to see you, or glad you're alive? Caleb's voice had an edge to it, something bitter. What are you doing here? Looking for my sister. Thought maybe she'd be happy to see me, but I guess I was wrong. Mara finally moved, stepping forward. I looked for you, for years. Where were you? Around. Caleb shrugged. Here and there. You know how it is. No, I don't. Tell me. Caleb's smile faded. Does it matter? I'm here now. Thomas had come out of the barn, Lucy behind him, both of them watching with wide eyes. Mara glanced at them, then back at Caleb. We need to talk. Inside. She walked toward the house, and Caleb followed. Ethan dismounted, handed his reins to Thomas, and said quietly, Keep Lucy out here. Don't come in unless I call for you. Thomas nodded, his face serious. Ethan followed them inside and found Mara and Caleb standing on opposite sides of the room, the space between them charged. So this is the life you built, Caleb said, looking around. Got yourself a husband. A nice little setup. Real cozy. What do you want, Caleb? Can't a man visit his sister? Not after 10 years of silence, no. Caleb's jaw tightened. You left me, Mara. You ran off and left me with that bastard, and I had to survive on my own. So don't act like you're the victim here. I came back for you, Mara said, her voice shaking. I saved every dollar I could, and I came back. You were gone. Yeah, well, I couldn't wait around forever. Ethan stepped forward. Caleb, If you need a place to stay, food, whatever, we can help. But you need to stop talking to her like that." Caleb turned to look at him, and there was something dangerous in his eyes. "This your husband? The one who bought you like cattle?" Mara moved between them. "That's enough." "Is it? Because from where I'm standing, you traded one cage for another." "Get out," Mara said, her voice low and hard. "Mara, I said get out, now." Caleb stared at her for a long moment, then laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Fine, but don't think this is over. You owe me, Mara, for everything I did to keep you alive, and I'm going to collect." He walked out, and the door slammed behind him. Mara stood there, shaking, and Ethan moved toward her. "Don't," she said, holding up a hand. "Just don't." She walked into the bedroom and closed the door, and Ethan stood in the empty room, feeling like something had just broken that he didn't know how to fix. Caleb didn't leave. He set up camp about a mile from the ranch, and Ethan would see him sometimes, riding the property line, watching the house. He didn't come closer, but he didn't leave either. It was like having a wolf circling, waiting for the right moment to strike. Mara wouldn't talk about it. She threw herself into work even harder than before, pushing herself until Ethan thought she'd collapse. He tried to get her to slow down, to talk, but she shut him out. Thomas noticed. "She's scared," he said one morning while they were fixing the barn door. "What makes you say that?" "I've seen that look before. On my ma, right before everything fell apart." He hammered a nail with more force than necessary. "People get scared. They either run or they fight. Mara's not the running type." "No, she's not." "So what's she fighting?" Ethan didn't have an answer. That night he found Mara outside again, staring at the horizon. He sat down beside her without asking. "He's not going to leave, is he?" Ethan said. "No." "What does he want?" Mara was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Money. It's always money with Caleb. He thinks I owe him for what he did when we were kids, for the beatings he took, the sacrifices he made. And maybe I do. But I can't give him what we don't have." "Did you tell him that?" "He wouldn't believe me if I did." She turned to look at Ethan. "He's not the brother I remember, that boy, the one who protected me, who cared. He's gone. What's left is just angry. Then we send him away. It's not that simple." "Why not?" "Because he's my brother. Because part of me still loves him, even though I shouldn't. Because—" She stopped, her voice breaking. "Because if I give up on him, what does that make me?" Ethan reached out, took her hand. "It makes you smart. It makes you someone who knows when to let go." "I don't know if I can." "Then we'll figure it out together." She looked at him, and in the lamplight from the house, her eyes were wet. "Why are you doing this? You didn't sign up for this mess." "I signed up for you. That means all of it." Mara leaned against him, and Ethan put his arm around her, and they sat there in the dark, holding on to each other while the world tried to tear them apart. The confrontation came 3 days later. Ethan was in the barn when he heard shouting. He ran out to find Caleb in the yard, Thomas blocking his path to the house, and Mara coming out with her shotgun. "I told you to stay away," Mara said, "and I told you we're not done." Caleb looked past Thomas at her. "You owe me, Mara. $3,000. That's what I figure you cost me over the years." "3,000? Are you insane? Call it interest. Call it payback." "I don't care. You pay me, or I make life real difficult for you and your little family here." Ethan stepped forward. "You need to leave. Now." Caleb turned to him, his hand moving toward his gun. "Or what? You gonna shoot me? In front of your wife and kids?" "If I have to." The air went tight. Lucy was crying somewhere behind them, and Thomas had his fists clenched, and Mara's finger was on the trigger of the shotgun. Then Mara said, "I'll pay you." Everyone turned to look at her. "What?" Ethan said. "I'll pay him. $3,000. But it'll take time, a year, maybe 2. Caleb laughed. "A year? I'm supposed to just trust you'll come through?" "You don't have a choice. It's that or nothing." Caleb's eyes went cold. "You think you can play me like that? You think I'm still that stupid kid who took your beatings?" "I think you're desperate," Mara said quietly. "Just like I was when I left. Just like you were when I came back and you were gone." "We're both desperate, Caleb. So either we make a deal or we end this right now. Your choice." The silence stretched out, and Ethan's hand was on his own gun, ready. Then Caleb spat on the ground. 1 year. You don't pay. I come back, and I burn this place to the ground. Understood. Caleb mounted his horse, looked at Mara one last time, and rode off. When he was gone, Mara lowered the shotgun and sat down hard on the ground. Ethan was beside her in a second, and Thomas pulled Lucy close, and they all just sat there, shaking. $3,000, Ethan said finally. Mara, we don't have... I know. Then why? Because I needed him gone, and I'll figure out the rest later. She looked up at him, and her face was pale. I'm sorry. I just made everything worse. No, you bought us time. That's something. But even as he said it, Ethan knew the truth. They were drowning, and the water was rising faster than they could bail. The rest of July passed in a blur of work and worry. The mares showed signs of being pregnant, which was good. The garden produced enough vegetables to can for winter, which was good. The bank hadn't come calling yet, which was good. But hanging over everything was the weight of what Mara had promised Caleb. $3,000 they'd never have, and a deadline that would come faster than they were ready for. Ethan tried to think of solutions. More horses to sell. Hiring out for other ranches. Anything. But the math never worked. They were 200 short for the bank by October and 3,000 short for Caleb by next summer, and there was no world where those numbers added up. One night in early August, Mara came to him with a piece of paper. I've been thinking, she said. About? The breeding program. If we expand it, breed not just our mares, but take in mares from other ranches, charge a stud fee. We could double our income. Ethan looked at the numbers she'd written out. This would work, but we'd need more space, more feed, more hands to help. We've got Thomas, and I can do more. Mara, you're already doing everything. Then I'll do more than everything. She sat down across from him. We're out of options, Ethan. This is the only play we've got. He studied her face, the determination there, the exhaustion underneath it. You're going to kill yourself trying to save this place. Maybe, but at least I'll go down fighting. Ethan reached across the table, took her hand. Then we fight together. She smiled, and for the first time in weeks, it looked real. About that. They started the expansion in mid-August. Donovan agreed to spread the word about their stud services, and within 2 weeks, they had 3 mares boarded from neighboring ranches. The money wasn't huge, $50 per mare for the season, but it was something. Thomas worked like he was twice his age, and Lucy helped where she could, feeding the horses, keeping the water troughs clean. Ethan watched them sometimes and felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, pride. Not in what he'd done, but in what they'd all built together. This broken family that shouldn't have worked, but somehow did. One evening, he found Mara sitting on the porch, watching the sunset. He sat beside her, and they didn't talk for a while. You think we'll make it? She asked finally. I think we're still standing. That's something. Is it enough? Ethan looked at her. It has to be. Mara leaned her head on his shoulder, and they sat there as the sky turned red and gold. And for just a moment, the weight of everything didn't feel quite so heavy. September came with cooler nights and the first hint of autumn. The mares were definitely pregnant now, which meant the plan was working. Ethan did the math again and again, trying to make the numbers stretch, and finally admitted they might actually pull this off. Maybe not the 3,000 for Caleb, not yet, but the bank payment was within reach. He was in the barn one afternoon when Thomas came running in, out of breath. Someone's coming, 3 riders. Ethan grabbed his rifle and went outside. 3 men on horseback were approaching, and they had the look of law about them. The lead rider pulled up, tipped his hat. Afternoon, looking for Ethan Hale. That's me. The man pulled out a piece of paper. Got a warrant here for the arrest of Caleb Quinn. Heard he's been seen around these parts. Ethan's stomach dropped. What's the warrant for? Robbery. Shot a man in Laramie 2 months back. He alive or dead? Alive, but he's not here. Mind if we look around? Be my guest. The men searched the property, found nothing, and rode off with a promise to come back if they heard anything. When they were gone, Mara came out of the house, her face pale. He's wanted, she said. Yeah. For murder. Robbery. The man survived. It's still... She stopped, her hands shaking. I brought him here. I put all of you in danger. No, don't try to make this okay. It's not okay. She turned and walked away, and Ethan let her go, knowing there were no words that would fix this. That night, Caleb came back. Ethan woke to the sound of something breaking. He was up and moving before his brain caught up, rifle in hand. He found Caleb in the barn, holding a lantern, his face twisted with anger. They came looking for me, Caleb said. You tell them I was here? No, but they know. Then I need to disappear, and I need money to do it. We don't have... Don't lie to me! Caleb threw the lantern, and it shattered against the wall. Fire licked up the wood, and Ethan's heart stopped. What did you do? What I had to. Caleb pulled his gun. Get me the money, or this whole place burns. Mara's voice came from the doorway, cold and clear. No, it doesn't. She was holding the shotgun, and her eyes were dead calm. Mara, Caleb started. I'm done, Caleb. I'm done making excuses for you, done trying to save you. You want money? You want to burn this place down? Go ahead. But you'll have to go through me first. Caleb stared at her, and something flickered in his face, hurt, anger, maybe even regret. You'd really choose them over me? Your own blood? You stopped being my blood the day you became this. Mara's voice didn't waver. Now get out, and don't come back. The fire was spreading, and Ethan moved toward it, but Caleb raised the gun. Stay where you are. Caleb, the barn. I don't care about the barn. Then Thomas was there, running in with a bucket of water, and Lucy behind him, and everything happened at once. Caleb turned toward the kids, Mara shouted, and Ethan lunged. The gun went off, the bullet going wild, and Ethan tackled Caleb to the ground. They fought, fists and fury, and somewhere in the chaos, the fire grew. Thomas and Lucy were throwing water. Mara was shouting for them to get out, and Ethan's knuckles split against Caleb's jaw. Then Caleb stopped fighting. He just lay there, breathing hard, blood on his lip. Just let me go, he said quietly. Please. Ethan looked at Mara. She stood there, shotgun still raised, tears on her face. Go, she said. And if I ever see you again, I'll kill you myself. Caleb got up, stumbled toward his horse, and rode off into the dark. They put out the fire before it took the whole barn, but the damage was done. Half the structure was gone, 2 stalls destroyed, and the smell of smoke hung over everything. They stood in the wreckage, covered in soot and ash, and nobody said anything for a long time. Finally, Lucy tugged on Mara's skirt. Are we safe now? Mara knelt down, pulled the girl into her arms. Yeah, sweetheart, we're safe. And for the first time, Ethan thought maybe she believed it. The morning after the fire, Ethan stood in the ruins of the barn and tried to calculate what they'd lost. Half the structure meant half the space for the boarded mares, which meant they'd have to turn away paying customers, which meant less money for the bank. He ran the numbers in his head 3 times, and each time they came up worse. Mara was already working, pulling out charred boards, salvaging what could be saved. Her face was streaked with soot, her hands blistered, and she moved like something mechanical. No pause, no rest, just motion. Mara. She didn't stop. Mara, you need to take a break. I'm fine. You're not fine. None of this is fine. She dropped the board she was holding and turned on him, her eyes blazing. What do you want me to say, Ethan? That I'm sorry. That I'm the reason we're standing in a burned-out barn with no money and no plan. Because I already know that. I don't need you to remind me. That's not what then what? What do you want from me? The question hung there between them, raw and sharp. Ethan opened his mouth, closed it, then said quietly, I want you to stop punishing yourself for things you can't control. Mara's face crumpled, just for a second, before she pulled it back together. I brought him here. I let him in. This is on me. He made his choices. You made yours. There's a difference. Is there? She looked around at the wreckage. Because from where I'm standing, it all looks the same. Thomas appeared in his doorway, Lucy behind him. The boy's face was serious, his hands clenched at his sides. We can rebuild it, Thomas said. Mara shook her head. We don't have the money for materials. Then we use what we've got. There's timber on the north edge of the property. We cut it ourselves, mill it if we have to. It'll take longer, but we can do it. Thomas, I'm not asking. The kid's voice was hard. This is our home. We don't just give up because it got hard. Ethan looked at Mara, saw something shift in her expression. She studied Thomas for a long moment, then nodded. All right, we rebuild. They worked for 3 weeks straight, from first light until they couldn't see anymore. Ethan and Thomas felled trees, stripped bark, shaped beams. Mara and Lucy cleared debris, sorted nails, held boards in place while Ethan hammered. It was brutal work, the kind that left your hands bleeding and your back screaming, but nobody complained. They were too tired to complain. Donovan rode out one afternoon, took a look at what they were doing, and whistled low. You folks are either the bravest people I've met or the dumbest. Ethan wiped sweat from his face. Little of both, probably. How much longer you figure this'll take? Another week if we're lucky, 2 if we're not. Donovan nodded slowly. I'll extend the lease on the stallion, no charge for the extra time, and I'll talk to the other ranchers, see if they'll wait on bringing their mares over until you're ready. Mara looked up from where she was working. Why would you do that? Because I've been where you are. Lost everything once, had to build it back from nothing. Someone gave me a hand when I needed it. Figure I can do the same. He tipped his hat. You folks keep fighting. World needs more of that. He rode off, and Mara stood there, something like tears in her eyes. People surprise you sometimes, Ethan said. Yeah, they do, Shar said. The barn went up slower than Ethan hoped, but faster than he feared. By mid-October, they had 4 walls and a roof that didn't leak. It wasn't pretty. The wood was rough, the joints weren't perfect, but it stood. And that was enough. The day they finished, they all stood in the yard and looked at it. Thomas had his arm around Lucy, and Mara stood beside Ethan, close enough that their shoulders touched. It's smaller than before, Lucy said. Yeah, Ethan agreed. But it's ours. Thomas looked up at him. Does this mean we're staying? The question caught Ethan off guard. He glanced at Mara, who was watching him with those pale green eyes. Yeah, Ethan said. We're staying. Lucy smiled, and Thomas nodded, and Mara's hand found his, squeezing once before letting go. Woolton. The bank payment came due on October 1st, and Ethan rode into Carterville with every dollar they had, $573, scraped together from the horse sales, the stud fees, and selling off everything they could spare. It was still more than $300 short, but it was all they had. Brill looked at the money like it was an insult. This isn't what we agreed on. It's what I've got. Mr. Hale, we've been more than patient. I know, and I'm asking for more patience. Give me until spring. The mares will foal, we'll sell them, and you'll have your money plus interest. Brill leaned back in his chair. And if the foals don't sell, then you take the land. But you'll take it knowing I did everything I could. The banker studied him for a long moment, then sighed. Spring, May 1st, not a day later. Deal. Ethan walked out feeling like he'd just bought them time they might not be able to use, but time was better than nothing. Winter came early again, meaner than the year before. The first snow hit in late October, and by November the ground was frozen solid. The cattle huddled together, the horses stayed in the new barn, and the 4 of them lived in close quarters that got smaller every day. But something was different this year. The silences weren't as heavy. The meals were louder, with Thomas telling stories about his father that made Lucy laugh and Mara smile. Ethan found himself looking forward to evenings by the fire, where they'd sit together and just exist in the same space without it feeling like a fight. One night in December, after the kids were asleep, Mara sat beside him and said, I think I'm happy. Ethan looked at her. You think? I'm not sure I remember what it feels like, but this... She gestured around the room, at the sleeping kids, at the life they'd built. This feels close. Close is good. She leaned against him, and Ethan wrapped his arm around her, and they sat there listening to the wind howl outside while the fire crackled in the hearth. Thank you, Mara said quietly. For what? For not giving up. On this place. On me. Ethan pressed a kiss to the top of her head. Never crossed my mind. That's it. Christmas came, and they didn't have much. No money for gifts, no fancy decorations. But Mara made a cake from their dwindling flour supply, and Thomas carved a small horse for Lucy out of scrap wood, and Ethan found an old harmonica in Sarah's things and gave it to Thomas, who'd mentioned once that his father used to play. They sat around the table, eating cake and listening to Thomas try to figure out how to make the harmonica work. And it was loud and messy and nothing like the quiet, grief-soaked Christmas Ethan had spent the year before. Lucy tugged on Mara's sleeve. "Can we do this every year?" Mara's eyes went soft. "Yeah, sweetheart. Every year." That night, after the kids were in bed, Mara and Ethan stood outside, watching the snow fall. "You think we'll make it?" Mara asked. Ethan had stopped trying to predict the future. "I think we're here right now. That's enough." Mara turned to look at him, and there was something in her face he hadn't seen before. Something open, vulnerable. "Ethan, She stopped, and he waited. "I don't know how to say this without it sounding stupid, but I think I'm falling for you. Not because you saved me or because we're stuck together, but because you're—" She struggled for words. "You're decent and kind, and you didn't run when things got hard. And I don't know what to do with that." Ethan's heart was pounding. "You don't have to do anything with it." "Don't I?" He reached out, cupped her face in his hands. "Mara, I've been half in love with you since you shot those coyotes and didn't blink. I just didn't think I had the right to say it." "Why not?" "Because you married me out of necessity, not choice." "Maybe it started that way," Mara said. "But it's not that way anymore." She kissed him then, and it wasn't soft or gentle. It was fierce and desperate and real. Ethan pulled her closer, and she wrapped her arms around his neck, and they stood there in the snow, holding on like they were afraid to let go. When they finally pulled apart, Mara was smiling, a real, genuine smile that made her whole face light up. "So what now?" she asked. "Now we go inside before we freeze to death." She laughed, and the sound was so unexpected, so full of life, that Ethan felt something break open in his chest, something that had been locked up tight since Sarah died. They went inside, and that night, for the first time, Mara didn't sleep in the other room. Talk. January brought brutal cold and storms that buried the ranch in snow. They were trapped inside for days at a time, and the cabin fever got so bad that even Lucy snapped at Thomas over something small. But they made it through, and when the storms finally broke, Ethan dug a path to the barn and found all the animals alive and well. The mares were getting close to foaling, which meant the next few months would be critical. Ethan read every book he could find on horse breeding, asked Donovan 100 questions, and still felt like he didn't know enough. One afternoon in late January, Mara found him in the barn, staring at one of the pregnant mares with a look of pure panic. "What's wrong?" "What if I do this wrong? What if something happens during the birth and I can't fix it?" Mara leaned against the stall door. "Then we deal with it, same as we deal with everything else." "This is different. These foals, they're our whole future. If we lose them, we won't." "You don't know that." "No, but I know you, and I know you don't quit, even when you probably should." She reached out, took his hand. "We'll figure it out together. We always do." Ethan looked at her, at this woman who'd shown up with one trunk and a wall around her heart, and who'd somehow become the center of everything that mattered, and felt the fear ease just a little. "Together," he repeated. "Together." The first foal came in early February in the middle of the night during a snowstorm. Ethan woke to Thomas shaking him, saying the mare was in distress. He was up and moving in seconds, Mara right behind him. They ran to the barn through knee-deep snow and found the mare down, sweating, her sides heaving. "How long has she been like this?" Ethan asked. "Maybe an hour. I tried to wake you sooner, but—" "You did good, Thomas. Real good." Ethan knelt beside the mare, checked her over. The foal was coming, but something was wrong. The position wasn't right. Mara was already rolling up her sleeves. "What do you need?" "Light, clean water, and pray this works." They worked for 2 hours, Ethan's hands inside the mare, trying to turn the foal, Mara holding the lantern steady and talking to the horse in a low, calm voice. Thomas and Lucy stayed in the doorway, watching with wide eyes. Finally, Ethan felt the foal shift. "Got it. Come on, girl. You can do this." The mare pushed, and the foal came in a rush, a tangle of legs and wetness that landed in the straw and didn't move. Ethan's heart stopped. "No, no, come on!" He grabbed the foal, cleared its airway, rubbed it hard with straw. Nothing. Mara dropped to her knees beside him, her hands joining his, working desperately. "Breathe," Mara said. "Come on, baby, breathe." Then the foal gasped, coughed, and took a shaky breath. Ethan sat back, his hands shaking. "It's alive." "It's alive," Mara repeated, and she started laughing, this wild, relieved sound that made Thomas and Lucy come running over. The foal was a colt, all legs and big eyes, and when he tried to stand, he fell over twice before figuring it out. Lucy clapped her hands, and Thomas grinned, and Mara leaned against Ethan, exhausted. "One down," Ethan said. "3 to go," Mara added. But they'd done it. They'd brought new life into this harsh world, and that felt like winning. Check. The other foals came easier. A filly in mid-February, another colt in early March, and a second filly in late March. All healthy, all strong, and each one felt like a promise that maybe things were going to work out after all. Donovan came by to inspect them and offered $2,000 on the spot for all 4. Ethan nearly fell over. $2,000? That's what they're worth. Good bloodlines, strong builds. I know buyers in Cheyenne who'll pay double that, but I'm giving you first offer. Ethan looked at Mara. $2,000 would cover the bank, most of what they owed Caleb if he ever came back, and leave enough to get through the year. It was everything they needed. "We'll take it," Mara said. Donovan nodded. "I'll have the money by the end of the week. You folks did good." When he left, Ethan grabbed Mara and spun her around, and she laughed. That same wild laugh from the night the first foal was born. "We did it," Ethan said. "We did it," Mara agreed. Thomas and Lucy were watching from the porch, and Ethan called out, "Get over here!" They ran over, and Ethan pulled them all into a hug, this makeshift family that somehow fit together better than anything planned ever could. April came with warmth and the promise of spring. The snow melted, the grass started growing, and the ranch began to feel less like a battlefield and more like a home. Ethan caught himself smiling more, working with a lighter heart, and sometimes he'd look at Mara and think about how lucky he'd been that she'd answered his ad. One evening, Mara came to him with a look on her face he couldn't quite read. "I need to tell you something." Ethan's stomach dropped. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong, at least I don't think so." She took a breath. "I'm pregnant." The world stopped. Ethan stared at her, his brain trying to catch up with his ears. "You're pregnant. About 3 months, I think." 1,000 thoughts hit at once. Fear, joy, panic, hope. How do you feel about this?" Mara's hands were shaking, terrified. "We barely made it through this year with 4 of us. Adding another is going to be fine," Ethan cut in. He stepped forward, took her hands. "We'll figure it out, we always do." "But what if—" "No, what ifs? We've got time to prepare, and we've got each other. That's all we need." Mara looked up at him, her eyes wet. "You're not scared?" "I'm scared as hell. But I'm also," he searched for the word, "I'm happy. Really happy." She smiled, and it was tremulous but real. "Yeah?" "Yeah." He kissed her, and she kissed him back. And when they pulled apart, Ethan felt like the world had just gotten bigger and smaller at the same time. They told the kids that night over dinner. Lucy didn't really understand, but she seemed excited about the idea of a baby. Thomas went quiet, his face unreadable. After dinner, Ethan found him outside, staring at the stars. "You all right?" Thomas shrugged. "Yeah, just thinking." "About?" "About how this is real now. You and Mara, me and Lucy. We're actually a family." "That bother you?" "No. It's just—" Thomas struggled for words. "My whole life, family meant people who left or died or hurt you. But you two, you stayed, even when it got bad, even when it would have been easier to quit. You stayed." Ethan's throat went tight. "We're not going anywhere, Thomas. Not me, not Mara, not the baby. This is it. This is home." Thomas nodded, and when he looked up, his eyes were bright. "Good, because I'm not ready to lose this." "You won't have to." May came, and with it, the final payment to the bank. Ethan rode into Carterville with $2,000 in his saddlebag and a confidence he hadn't felt in years. He walked into Brill's office, dropped the money on the desk, and said, "We're square." Brill counted it twice, then looked up with something like respect. I'll be honest, Hale. I didn't think you'd make it. Neither did I. But here we are. Brill signed the papers, handed over the deed, and shook Ethan's hand. Congratulations! The land's yours, free and clear. Ethan walked out into the sunlight, the deed in his hand, and felt something he hadn't felt since before Sarah died. Peace. He rode back to the ranch and found Mara in the garden, her belly just starting to show. She looked up when she heard the horse, and he held up the deed. It's ours. Mara's face lit up and she ran to him, as much as a pregnant woman could run, and threw her arms around him. We did it, she whispered. We did it, he agreed. That night they sat on the porch, watching the sunset. Thomas and Lucy were playing some game in the yard, their laughter carrying on the wind. What happens now? Mara asked. Ethan thought about it. We keep building, expand the breeding program, maybe add more cattle, fix up the house, put in real windows, make this place something we're proud of. Sounds like a lot of work. It is, but we've got time. Mara leaned her head on his shoulder. I like the sound of that. Time. They sat in silence for a while, and Ethan thought about how far they'd come, from two strangers bound by desperation to a family held together by choice. It wasn't perfect. It never would be. But it was theirs, and that made it worth everything. Summer settled in warm and easy, and the ranch thrived. The breeding program brought in steady money, enough that they could hire occasional help and actually save for the future. Mara's pregnancy progressed without complications, though she refused to slow down, much to Ethan's frustration. One afternoon in July, he found her hauling water buckets to the garden, and he physically took them from her hands. You're 6 months pregnant. You need to rest. I'm pregnant, not dying. Mara, don't Mara me. I've been doing this my whole life. I know my limits. Yeah, and you also know how to ignore them. He set the buckets down. Let me help. That's what I'm here for. She opened her mouth to argue, then stopped. You're not going to let this go, are you? Not a chance. She sighed, but there was a smile tugging at her lips. Fine, but only because you're being annoyingly persistent. I can live with that. August brought news that made Ethan's blood run cold. A writer came through saying there'd been sightings of Caleb Quinn near the Colorado border, and that he was riding with a gang now, robbing stages, causing trouble. The law was after him, but he kept slipping away. Mara took the news hard. She didn't say much, just went quiet in that way she did when she was wrestling with something big. Ethan gave her space, but he watched her, worried. One night she came to him. If he comes back, he won't. But if he does, then we deal with it. Ethan pulled her close. You're not responsible for him anymore, Mara. You did everything you could. What he does now, that's on him. I keep thinking about what you said, about knowing when to let go. She looked up at him. I think I finally understand what you meant. Yeah? Yeah, Caleb's not my brother anymore. He's just a man who shares my blood, and I don't owe him anything. No, you don't. She nodded and something in her face relaxed, like she'd been carrying a weight for so long she'd forgotten what it felt like to set it down. September brought the first real cold snap, and Mara started nesting, cleaning the house top to bottom, organizing everything, preparing a corner of the bedroom for the baby. Lucy followed her around, asking a million questions about babies, and Thomas built a cradle out of leftover barnwood that was rough but sturdy. Ethan watched it all and felt his heart swell with something he couldn't quite name. This was what he'd lost when Sarah died. Not just a person, but the possibility of a future. And now, against all odds, he had it back. Different, messier, harder won, but real. One evening, as they were all sitting around the table, Lucy looked up from her dinner and said, "Are we a real family now?" The question hung in the air. Mara reached over, took the girl's hand. "We've always been a real family, sweetheart, from the day you walked into this yard. But we're not related." "Family isn't just blood," Thomas said quietly. "It's the people who stay, who fight for you, who don't leave when things get hard." He looked at Ethan, then at Mara, and Ethan saw the truth in the kid's eyes. He'd finally stopped waiting for the other shoe to drop. "That's right," Ethan said. "That's exactly right." Well, October came with golden leaves and crisp mornings. The ranch was in good shape, the bank was paid, and there was money in the tin can Mara kept hidden in the cupboard. For the first time in years, Ethan felt like they were ahead instead of just keeping up. Mara was due in November and she moved slower now, her belly huge, her hands pressed to her lower back. Ethan tried to get her to rest, and she tried to ignore him, and it became a familiar dance they both knew the steps to. One afternoon, she cornered him in the barn. "I want to talk about names." "All right. If it's a girl, I want to name her after my mother, Eleanor. Eleanor Hale. I like it. And if it's a boy?" Ethan thought for a moment. "What about James? It was my father's name." Mara nodded. "James it is." She started to walk away, then turned back. "Ethan?" "Yeah?" "Thank you for giving me this, for giving me a reason to believe things could be different." He crossed the space between them, pulled her into his arms. "You gave me the same thing. We're even." The baby came on a cold November night, 3 weeks early and in a hurry. Ethan woke to Mara gripping his arm, her face pale. "It's time." He'd thought he was prepared. He wasn't. He ran around like a madman, boiling water, gathering towels, waking Thomas and Lucy and sending them to the neighbors for help. By the time the neighbor woman arrived, a sturdy woman named Mrs. Callahan, who delivered half the babies in the county, Mara was in hard labor, her face slick with sweat. "You need to leave," Mrs. Callahan said to Ethan. "I'm not leaving her. This isn't a place for men." Mara grabbed his hand. "He stays." Mrs. Callahan looked between them, then shrugged. "Your choice. But don't pass out on me." The labor lasted 6 hours, and Ethan thought he might die from watching Mara go through it. She didn't scream, she was too stubborn for that, but she gripped his hand hard enough to bruise, and he saw the pain in every line of her face. Then finally, a baby's cry split the air. "It's a girl," Mrs. Callahan said, holding up a tiny, squalling thing covered in blood and vernix. Mara was crying, and Ethan was crying, and when Mrs. Callahan cleaned the baby up and placed her in Mara's arms, the whole world narrowed down to this one perfect moment. "Eleanor," Mara whispered. "Her name is Eleanor." The baby stopped crying and looked up at her mother with dark, unfocused eyes, and Ethan felt something crack wide open in his chest, a love so fierce it was almost painful. "She's perfect," he said. "She is," Mara agreed. Checked. The first few weeks were a blur of sleepless nights and constant worry. Eleanor was small but healthy, and she had a set of lungs that could wake the dead. Mara nursed her, walked her, sang to her in a soft voice Ethan had never heard before. Lucy was fascinated, always wanting to hold the baby, and Thomas watched from a distance with a protective look in his eyes. One night, Ethan found Thomas sitting on the porch, staring out at the dark. "Can't sleep?" Thomas shook his head. "Just thinking." "About?" "About how lucky we are. How easily this all could have gone different." Ethan sat down beside him. "Yeah, it could have." "You think we'll be all right, long term?" "I think we've survived everything the world's thrown at us so far. I don't see why that would change." Thomas was quiet for a moment. "I'm glad you and Mara found each other, even if it was by accident." "Me too, kid. Me too." Ichan. Winter came again, but this time it felt different. The house was full of noise, Eleanor crying, Lucy laughing, Thomas working on some project in the corner. The barn was solid, the animals were healthy, and the land was theirs. On Christmas Eve, they sat around the table, all 6 of them, counting the baby asleep in Mara's arms. And Ethan looked around at the faces he'd come to love more than he'd thought possible. "I want to say something," he said. Everyone looked at him. A year and a half ago, this place was falling apart, and I was barely holding on. I didn't think there was any way forward. But then Mara showed up, and then these two. He gestured at Thomas and Lucy, and now Eleanor. And somehow we built this together. His voice caught, and he had to stop for a second. What I'm trying to say is thank you for staying, for fighting, for being a family when I'd forgotten what that felt like. Mara reached across the table, took his hand. We're the ones who should be thanking you. No, we're all even. We saved each other. Thomas raised his glass of water. To family. To family, they echoed. And as Ethan looked around the table at the people who'd become his whole world, he thought about how strange life was, how the worst moments could lead to the best ones, how strangers could become home, how broken things could be made whole again if you just refused to quit. Outside, the snow was falling soft and steady, covering the land in white. But inside, the fire burned warm, and the people he loved were safe, and that was everything. The winter passed easier than the ones before it, though Eleanor made sure nobody got much sleep. She was a fussy baby, colicky and demanding, and there were nights when Ethan and Mara took turns walking her around the house at 3 a.m, both of them so tired they could barely see straight. One particularly brutal night in January, Ethan found Mara sitting in the rocking chair, tears streaming down her face, Eleanor screaming in her arms. "I don't know what she wants," Mara said, her voice breaking. "I've fed her, changed her, held her, sung to her. Nothing works." Ethan took the baby, gave Mara's shoulder a squeeze. "Go sleep. I've got her." "You need sleep too." "I'll manage. Go." Mara stumbled to the bedroom, and Ethan walked Eleanor around the house, bouncing her gently, humming a tune he half remembered from his own childhood. After an hour, she finally quieted, her small body going limp against his chest. He stood there, afraid to move, afraid to breathe, and felt the weight of this tiny life in his arms. She was so small, so fragile, and completely dependent on them not to screw this up. The thought terrified him. February brought a thaw, and with it, the return of work. The breeding program was expanding faster than they'd anticipated. Word had spread about the quality of their stock, and ranchers from 3 counties over were bringing mares to be bred. Ethan hired 2 hands to help with the extra work, a quiet man named Pete, who knew horses better than people, and a kid barely older than Thomas named Jesse, who worked hard and asked few questions. Thomas had grown in the past year. He was almost as tall as Ethan now, his shoulders broader, his hands rough with calluses. He worked alongside the men without complaint, and Ethan caught himself relying on the kid more and more. One afternoon, Ethan found Thomas in the barn, teaching Jesse how to properly clean a hoof. "You're good with him," Ethan said. Thomas shrugged. "He reminds me of how I was when I first got here, scared, trying to figure out where he fits." "And where do you fit now?" Thomas looked up, met Ethan's eyes. "Here. This is home." The simplicity of it hit Ethan square in the chest. "Yeah, it is." March came, and with it, trouble that had been brewing for months. A neighboring ranch, the Crawford place, had been struggling. The old man who ran it had died the previous fall, leaving it to his son Marcus, who had more debts than sense. Marcus had tried to make a go of it, but the land was worn out, the cattle were sick, and the bank was breathing down his neck. Ethan heard about it through Donovan, who mentioned in passing that Marcus was looking to sell. The Crawford place bordered their land to the east, another 150 acres of grazing land and a water source that would make a huge difference come summer. That night, Ethan brought it up with Mara. "How much is he asking?" she said, Eleanor asleep on her shoulder. $1,500, Mara whistled low. "That's steep." "It's fair for what it is. The land's good, just needs work. Work we'd have to pay people to do, which means more money going out before any comes in." "I know, but long term it would set us up, give us room to expand, more water rights, better grazing." Mara was quiet, her hand rubbing slow circles on Eleanor's back. "We've got about 2,000 saved. If we buy the Crawford place, that leaves us 500 for emergencies. That's tight." "Too tight?" She looked at him. "What do you think?" Ethan had learned over the past 2 years that Mara's opinion wasn't just valuable. It was usually right. "I think it's a risk, but I also think we've made bigger risks work before." "Those risks nearly killed us." "Yeah, but they didn't." Mara smiled just a little. "You're stubborn, you know that?" "I learned from the best." She considered it for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, but we do this smart. We don't overextend. We hire carefully, we work the land ourselves as much as we can, and we don't touch that 500 unless it's life or death." Deal. They bought the Crawford place in early April, and Ethan spent the next 2 months working it from sunrise to well past dark. The fences were a disaster, the barn needed a new roof, and the grazing land was overgrazed and would need a season to recover. But it was theirs, and that meant something. Thomas worked beside him, and together they rebuilt fences, cleared brush, and started the slow process of bringing the land back. Lucy helped Mara with Eleanor in the garden, which had expanded to include vegetables they could sell in town. Pete and Jesse rotated between the two properties, keeping the horses fed and exercised. It was exhausting. Ethan would fall into bed at night so tired he couldn't feel his hands, and Mara would be right beside him, just as worn out. But there was satisfaction in it, the kind that came from building something real. One evening in late May, Ethan stood on the ridge that separated the two properties and looked out at the land. The sun was setting, painting everything gold and red, and he could see the ranch house in the distance, smoke rising from the chimney. Mara came up beside him, Eleanor strapped to her chest in a sling Thomas had fashioned from old cloth. "Pretty, isn't it?" she said. "Yeah. You think we bit off more than we can chew?" Ethan considered it. "Maybe, but we'll chew it anyway." Mara laughed, and the sound carried on the wind. "You know what I love about you?" "What?" "You're an optimist pretending to be a realist, and you're a realist pretending to be a pessimist. We balance each other out." "Yeah," Ethan said. "We do." But summer brought growth and complications in equal measure. The foals from the previous year sold well, bringing in enough money to cover the Crawford purchase and then some. But the extra land meant extra work, and even with Pete and Jesse helping, there weren't enough hours in the day. Ethan started looking for more hands, but good workers were hard to find, and the ones he did find wanted wages they couldn't quite afford. One afternoon, a man rode up to the ranch, tall, lean, with a scar running down his left cheek and eyes that had seen too much. He introduced himself as Wade Miller and said he was looking for work. "You got experience with horses?" Ethan asked. "Some. More with cattle, but I can learn." "Where you coming from?" Wade's jaw tightened. "Montana. Had a place up there. Lost it to the bank. Looking to start over." Ethan knew that story. He'd lived a version of it himself. "I can offer room and board plus $30 a month. Works hard. Hours are long." "I'll take it." Wade turned out to be a decent worker, quiet, competent, didn't ask questions. But there was something about him that made Ethan uneasy. The way he watched people when he thought they weren't looking. The way he flinched at loud noises. The way his hand would drift toward his hip, like he was reaching for a gun that wasn't there. Mara noticed it too. "You trust him?" she asked one night. "Not entirely, but we need the help, and he hasn't given me a reason not to." Yet, Ethan agreed. But July brought the kind of heat that made the air shimmer and turned the ground hard as stone. The water sources on the Crawford place started drying up, and Ethan had to dig a new well, back-breaking work that took 3 weeks and every ounce of strength he had. Thomas helped, along with Pete and Wade. Jesse had left the month before, heading west to try his luck in California. They worked in shifts, digging through rock and clay, and when they finally hit water, Ethan sat down right there in the dirt and didn't move for 10 minutes. Wade handed him a canteen. "Good work." "Thanks." "You built something real here, Hale. Not many people can say that." Ethan looked up at him. "You could build something too. Find a place. Settle down." Wade's expression went dark. "I tried that once. Didn't take." "Why not?" "Because some things don't let you go, no matter how far you run." He walked away, and Ethan sat there, trying to figure out what the man had meant. But Wade didn't elaborate, and Ethan didn't push. August brought news that Ethan had been dreading. A marshal rode through asking questions about Caleb Quinn. Turned out Caleb and his gang had robbed a stage near Denver, killed a guard in the process. The reward was up to $500, and the law wanted him bad. Mara took the news in silence, her face pale. That night, after the kids were in bed, she sat at the table and stared at nothing. "You all right?" Ethan asked. "I don't know. Part of me hoped he'd gotten away, started over somewhere. But that was stupid, wasn't it? Caleb doesn't start over, he just keeps destroying things. This isn't on you, isn't it? I let him go. I could have turned him in when he was here, but I didn't. Because he's your brother. That doesn't make you responsible for what he does now." Mara looked at him, her eyes red. "If he gets caught, they'll hang him." "I know. And if he doesn't, someone else is going to get hurt. That's not your fault either." "Then whose fault is it?" Her voice cracked. "Where does the blame stop, Ethan? When do I get to stop feeling like I could have changed this? Ethan reached across the table, took her hand. You can't save everyone, Mara, especially people who don't want to be saved. I know that. I do. But it still hurts. It's supposed to. That's how you know you're still human. She squeezed his hand and they sat there in the lamplight, holding on to each other while the weight of the world pressed down. September came with cooler nights and the first signs of autumn. Eleanor was crawling now, getting into everything, and Lucy followed her around like a protective shadow. Thomas had started talking about maybe going to school in Cheyenne, learning about animal husbandry or veterinary work, and Ethan encouraged it even though the thought of the kid leaving made his chest tight. The breeding program was thriving. They had 10 mares boarded now, and the foals were bringing in serious money. Ethan hired 2 more hands, brothers named Cole and Danny, who knew their way around a ranch and didn't cause trouble. The Crawford place was starting to come together too. The fences were solid, the barn had a new roof, and the cattle they'd bought were fattening up nicely. It was still a work in progress, but it was progress all the same. One afternoon, Donovan rode out with a proposition. I'm looking to expand my breeding operation, he said, and I need a partner, someone who knows horses, who's got good land, who I can trust. Ethan leaned against the fence. What kind of partnership? 50-50. I provide the stallions, you provide the facilities and the labor. We split the profits down the middle. That's generous. It's fair. You've proven you know what you're doing, Hale, and I'd rather work with someone I trust than try to do it all myself and screw it up. Ethan thought about it. 50% of Donovan's profits would be substantial, enough to expand even further, to maybe build that addition onto the house Mara had been talking about. I need to talk to my wife, Ethan said. Donovan grinned. Smart man. Let me know by the end of the week. Mara liked the idea. It's stable income, diversifies our risk, and Donovan's proven he's reliable. You don't see any downsides? We'd be more dependent on him. If he pulls out, we lose half our operation. True, but I don't think he will. He needs us as much as we need him. Mara nodded slowly. All right, let's do it. They shook on it with Donovan the following week, and by October the partnership was in full swing. The workload increased, but so did the money. For the first time since Ethan had lost Sarah, he felt like he could breathe without constantly calculating how to make the next month work. October brought the kind of weather that made Wyoming beautiful. Crisp air, golden leaves, skies so blue they hurt to look at. Eleanor was walking now, stumbling around on chubby legs, and the sound of her laughter filled the house. One evening, Ethan found Mara on the porch, watching Thomas and Lucy play with Eleanor in the yard. You look happy, he said. I am happy. She glanced at him. Is that strange, after everything we've been through? No, I think we earned it. Mara leaned against him. Sometimes I wake up and think this is all going to disappear, that I'll blink and be back in St. Louis, alone, with nothing. It's not going to disappear. How do you know? Because we built it, and things you build with your own hands don't just vanish. Mara was quiet for a moment, then said, I love you. It was the first time she'd said it out loud, and Ethan felt something warm spread through his chest. I love you too. She kissed him, and it was soft and sweet and real, and when she pulled back, she was smiling. I want to have another baby, she said. Ethan blinked. You sure? Eleanor's barely a year old. I know, but I want this house full. I want noise and chaos and life. I want to build something so big it can't be torn down. Ethan looked out at the ranch, at the land they'd fought for, the family they'd built, the future they were creating piece by piece. All right, he said, let's fill the house. November came, and with it, the news Ethan had been half expecting and half dreading. Caleb Quinn was dead. Shot by a marshal outside of Boulder during a botched robbery. The body had been identified and the reward claimed. It was over. Ethan told Mara gently, and she took it better than he'd expected. She nodded, her face unreadable, and then went outside. He found her an hour later, sitting by the fence line, staring at nothing. You all right? I don't know what I'm supposed to feel, she said quietly. I'm sad he's gone, but I'm also relieved. And I feel guilty for being relieved. Does that make sense? Yeah, it does. He was my brother, and he was a monster, and somehow he was both at the same time. Ethan sat beside her. You can miss who he was and be glad the monster is gone. Those things don't cancel each other out. Mara leaned against him, and he put his arm around her. Thank you. For what? For not telling me how to feel. For just being here. Always. They sat there until the sun went down, and when they finally went inside, Mara seemed lighter somehow, like she'd set down a burden she'd been carrying for too long. Winter came hard and fast, and by December the ranch was buried in snow. But this year, they were ready. The barns were solid, the food stores were full, and there was money saved for emergencies. Christmas was loud and chaotic, with Eleanor toddling around, getting into everything, and Lucy and Thomas arguing over who got to help Mara make the cake. Wade joined them for dinner, looking uncomfortable but grateful, and Pete stopped by with a bottle of whiskey that he and Ethan shared on the porch while the kids played inside. You built something good here, Pete said. We all did. Nah, this is yours and Mara's. The rest of us are just lucky to be part of it. Ethan clinked his glass against Pete's. Well, I'm glad you are. January brought a cold that settled in and wouldn't leave. The cattle huddled together, the horses stayed in the barn, and the humans stayed as close to the fire as they could manage. One particularly brutal night, Ethan woke to the sound of someone pounding on the door. He grabbed his rifle and went to answer it, finding Wade standing there, his face pale. Fire. The Crawford barn. Ethan's heart stopped. He was moving before his brain caught up, shouting for Thomas, grabbing coats, running out into the freezing night. The barn was a quarter-mile away, and by the time they got there, the flames were already eating through the roof. The horses were screaming. Ethan ran inside, the heat slamming into him like a wall. He could barely see through the smoke, but he found the first stall, threw it open, slapped the horse hard on the rump. The animal bolted past him, out into the night. Thomas was beside him, coughing, his eyes streaming. Together they worked through the stalls, freeing horses, dodging falling beams, their lungs burning. Wade was outside, directing the horses away from the flames, and Pete showed up with buckets, though everyone knew it was too late to save the structure. They got all the horses out. By the time the last one was clear, the barn was fully engulfed, the heat so intense it melted the snow 20 feet away. Ethan stood there, watching it burn, and felt something break inside him. They'd worked so hard to build this, and now it was just gone. Mara appeared beside him, Eleanor in her arms, Lucy clutching her skirt. Everyone all right? She asked. Yeah, horses are safe. The barn? Total loss. Mara watched the flames for a moment, then said, We'll rebuild. Mara, we just rebuilt the other one 2 years ago. I don't know if I've got another one in me. She looked at him, her eyes hard. Yes, you do. We all do. Because that's what we do, Ethan. We get knocked down and we get back up. That's who we are. He wanted to argue, wanted to say he was tired, that maybe this was a sign they'd pushed too far. But then he looked at Thomas, who was already talking to Wade about salvaging what they could. At Lucy, who was holding Eleanor and looking brave even though she was clearly scared. At Mara, who'd been through worse and was still standing. All right, he said, we rebuild. They rebuilt through February and March, working in cold that made their fingers numb and their backs scream. But they did it, and by April, the new barn stood, smaller than the old one, but solid. Donovan heard about the fire and extended their partnership terms, giving them more flexibility until they could get back on their feet. Neighbors they'd helped over the years showed up with lumber, nails, and hands willing to work. Standing in the finished barn, Ethan felt that same sense of accomplishment he'd felt before, but deeper now. Because it wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about thriving, about building something that could withstand whatever the world threw at it. So, spring came with new growth and new possibilities. Mara was pregnant again, due in late fall, and the breeding program was stronger than ever. Thomas had decided to stay another year before heading to school, and Lucy had started teaching Eleanor her letters. One evening in May, Ethan stood on the porch with Mara, watching the sun set over the land they'd fought so hard to keep. You ever think about where we'd be if you hadn't answered that ad? Mara asked. Sometimes. I'd probably have lost the ranch, ended up drifting from place to place. You? I'd still be in St. Louis alone, waiting for something to change. She took his hand. I'm glad I answered. Me too. They stood there in the fading light, and Ethan thought about all the ways life could break you down, and all the ways you could build yourself back up if you just refused to quit. He thought about Mara, who'd shown up with nothing and given him everything, about Thomas and Lucy, who'd found a home when they'd lost theirs, about Eleanor, and the baby on the way, and all the tomorrows still waiting to be lived. Whatever comes next, Ethan said, we'll face it together. Mara squeezed his hand. Together. And that was enough. The years that followed weren't easy. Nothing worth keeping ever was. But they were theirs, and that made all the difference. Mara's second pregnancy was harder than the first. She was older now, more worn down by the constant work, and the baby sat heavy in a way that made her wince when she moved. Ethan tried to get her to slow down, but Mara was Mara, which meant she worked until her body gave her no choice but to stop. The baby came in October, a month early, and smaller than Eleanor had been. Another girl with Mara's dark hair and Ethan's eyes. They named her Sarah, after the woman who'd come before, and Ethan held his newborn daughter and felt the past and present collide in a way that should have hurt but somehow didn't. You think she'd mind? Mara asked, her voice soft. The first Sarah, I mean. That we're using her name? Ethan looked down at the tiny face, the closed eyes, the impossibly small fingers wrapped around his thumb. I think she'd be honored. She always wanted children, never got the chance. I'm sorry you lost her. I am too, but I'm not sorry I found you. Mara smiled, tired but real. Even though I came with baggage? Especially because of that. Made things interesting. She laughed, and the sound filled the room with warmth. Thomas left for Cheyenne the following spring, and the leaving was harder than any of them expected. He'd grown into a man, tall, broad-shouldered, with hands that knew how to work, and a mind that wanted more than what a ranch could teach him. Ethan helped him pack his things, and when it came time to say goodbye, they stood there awkwardly until Thomas finally stepped forward and hugged him. Thank you, the kid said. For everything. Ethan's throat was too tight to speak, so he just nodded and held on a second longer than necessary. Mara was next, and she cupped Thomas's face in her hands the way she did with the girls when they needed comforting. You come back whenever you want, she said. This is always home. I know, Lucy cried, which made Eleanor cry, and baby Sarah fussed in sympathy, and the whole scene was a mess of emotions that nobody quite knew how to handle. But Thomas rode off with a promise to write, and Ethan stood in the yard long after the dust had settled, feeling the weight of watching someone you raised walk into the world and hoping you'd done enough. He'll be fine, Mara said, coming up beside him. I know, doesn't make it easier. No, it doesn't. The ranch continued to grow, but differently now. Ethan was in his early 40s, and his body reminded him of it every morning. The work that used to feel like a challenge now felt like a battle, and there were days when he wondered how much longer he could keep this up. Wade had become more than just a hired hand. He'd become a fixture, someone Ethan trusted to manage things when he couldn't. The man still had his demons, still went quiet sometimes in ways that made it clear he was fighting ghosts, but he was reliable, and in ranch work, that counted for more than almost anything. Pete had moved on the year before, heading north to Montana to be closer to family, and the brothers Cole and Danny had proven themselves capable enough that Ethan made them partners in the breeding operation. It wasn't charity, they earned it through sweat and skill, but it meant Ethan could step back a little, could spend more time with the girls, could actually sit down for dinner without feeling like he was stealing time from work that needed doing. One evening in late summer, Ethan found Mara in the garden, Eleanor helping her pull weeds while Sarah toddled around, getting more dirt on herself than anywhere else. You look tired, Mara said without looking up. I am tired. Old man tired or regular tired? Probably both. She sat back on her heels, wiped sweat from her forehead. We could hire more help. Take some of the load off. We've got enough help. It's not that. Then what is it? Ethan watched his daughters, Eleanor, now 5, already showing signs of Mara's stubbornness. Sarah, barely 2, all curiosity and fearlessness. I keep thinking about what happens when I can't do this anymore. When my back gives out, or my hands stop working, or whatever else comes with getting old. What happens to all this? Mara stood, brushed dirt from her skirt. The same thing that happens to everything. It changes, adapts, becomes something new. That's not an answer. Sure it is. You're just looking for guarantees that don't exist. She moved closer, took his hands in hers. We built this place from nothing, Ethan. From desperation and broken pieces and sheer stubbornness. It'll outlast us because that's what things built right do. They survive. And if they don't, then we gave it everything we had, and that's enough. Lucy grew into a young woman who looked more like Mara every day. Same sharp features, same steady eyes, same quiet strength that didn't need to announce itself. She'd taken over most of the household management, cooking meals that actually tasted good, keeping the girls in line when they got wild, managing the books with a precision that made Ethan grateful and slightly embarrassed that he'd been doing it wrong for years. One afternoon, she came to him with a ledger and a concerned expression. "We're spending too much on feed," she said. "If we rotate the pastures better, we could cut costs by almost 30%. Ethan looked at the numbers she'd laid out. "Where'd you learn this?" "Books, and paying attention." She tapped the page. "We could also negotiate better rates with the suppliers if we bought in bulk with the Donovan Ranch. Split the costs, split the delivery." "You talked to Donovan about this?" "I wrote him a letter. He thinks it's smart." Ethan sat back, impressed. "You're right. It is smart. Go ahead and set it up." Lucy beamed, and Ethan thought about how strange it was that the scared little girl who'd stumbled onto their property half dead was now basically running the financial side of the operation better than he ever had. Thomas came back for visits, once that first year, twice the second, 3 times the third. Each time he was different. More polished, more educated, full of ideas about modern ranching techniques and breeding programs that made Ethan feel ancient. But the kid never talked down to him, never made it seem like what they'd built was inferior to what he was learning. He just shared what he knew and asked questions about what they'd figured out through trial and error. On one visit, Thomas brought a woman with him, a quiet, practical girl named Anna, who worked at the veterinary college and had opinions about everything from hoof care to grain ratios. Ethan liked her immediately, especially when she didn't flinch at the mud, the smell, or the work. "You planning to marry her?" Mara asked Thomas one evening while Anna was helping Lucy with dinner. Thomas flushed. "I'm thinking about it, if she'll have me. She'd be stupid not to. I wanted to ask here, on the ranch. Seems right, you know. This is where everything started." Mara's eyes went soft. "Your father would have been proud of the man you've become. My father's been dead a long time. You and Ethan, you're the ones who raised me. We just gave you space to grow." "No, you gave me a home when I didn't have one. You gave me a reason to believe things could be different." Thomas looked out at the land, at the house, at the life they'd all built together. "I want that for my kids someday. This feeling of belonging." Mara pulled him into a hug, and Ethan watched from the doorway, his chest tight with something that felt like pride and grief and hope all mixed together. Thomas proposed to Anna on the ridge overlooking both properties, and she said yes, and the celebration that followed was loud and messy and perfect. The seasons turned, and with them came change that couldn't be stopped or slowed. Eleanor started school in Carterville, riding in with Lucy 3 days a week. Sarah grew from a toddler into a small terror who asked questions about everything, and had opinions Ethan was fairly sure no 4-year-old should have. Wade finally told his story one night after too much whiskey. He'd had a wife once, a daughter, lost them both to cholera while he was away working a cattle drive, came home to an empty house and graves he hadn't been there to dig. He'd been running from it ever since, trying to outwork the guilt of not being there when they'd needed him. "You can't outrun that kind of thing," Ethan said quietly. "Believe me, I tried." "How'd you stop?" "I didn't. I just learned to carry it different. Found new reasons to get up in the morning." Wade looked at him with red-rimmed eyes. "You think that's enough? New reasons?" "I think it's all we get. And we make it enough because the alternative is giving up, and I'm too stubborn for that." Wade nodded slowly, and something in his face shifted, not healed, but maybe starting to. Donovan's health started failing in the spring of Eleanor's 7th year. The man was in his late 60s, and the years had caught up with him. He sold most of his operation to his nephew, a sharp young man named Robert, who had good ideas and the ambition to implement them. Robert came to Ethan with a proposal to expand their partnership even further, to create something bigger than either ranch could do alone. Ethan brought it to Mara, to Lucy, to Wade, and the brothers, and they talked it over for weeks before agreeing. The expansion worked. By the following year, they were running one of the most successful breeding operations in Wyoming, with buyers coming from as far as Montana and Colorado. The money was good, better than good. And for the first time in his life, Ethan had more than he needed. He and Mara talked about what to do with it. They added on to the house, put in real windows, built a proper room for each of the girls. They paid off every debt they'd ever had and put money aside for Thomas when he graduated, for Lucy's future, for Eleanor and Sarah's education. But mostly, they saved it. Because they'd both learned the hard way that lean times could come faster than you expected. And being prepared was the difference between surviving and losing everything. Lucy got married when she was 22 to a rancher's son from the next county over, a good man named David who worked hard and treated her like she was precious. The wedding was small, held on the ranch, and Ethan walked her down the makeshift aisle they'd set up in the yard with his heart in his throat. "You don't have to do this if you're not sure," he whispered as they walked. Lucy laughed. "I'm sure." "Are you?" "No, but that's my problem, not yours." She squeezed his arm. "You know I'm not leaving, right? David's going to work here with us. We're building a house on the eastern edge of the property." "You talked to Mara about this." "Of course, she's the one who suggested it." Ethan looked over at Mara, who was holding Sarah and watching them with wet eyes, and felt something settle in his chest. The family was expanding, not fracturing. They were building something that would outlast all of them. What? Thomas graduated and came back to work on the ranch, bringing Anna with him as his wife. They built a house near Lucy and David's, and within 2 years Thomas had a son, a squalling, red-faced thing they named James, and Ethan held his grandson and felt the weight of generations in his arms. Eleanor grew into a young woman who had Mara's steel and Ethan's stubbornness, and she announced at 15 that she was going to college, that she was going to study law, that she was going to do something bigger than ranch work. Ethan tried to argue, and Mara told him to shut up and let the girl dream. Sarah, meanwhile, showed no interest in leaving. She loved the horses, loved the land, and by the time she was 12, she could outride anyone on the property. Ethan taught her everything he knew, and she soaked it up like she'd been born knowing it. One afternoon, watching Sarah work with a difficult mare, Mara said, "That one's going to run this place someday." "Maybe." "Not maybe. She's got the gift for it." Ethan watched his youngest daughter, her hands gentle but firm, her voice calm, the horse responding to her in ways it hadn't for anyone else. "Yeah, she does." The years accumulated like snowfall, soft at first, then heavy, then impossible to ignore. Ethan turned 50, then 55, and his body made it clear that the days of doing everything himself were over. He handed more and more responsibility to Wade, to Thomas, to the others, and tried not to feel useless. Mara aged beside him, her dark hair going gray, her face gaining lines that somehow made her more beautiful, not less. They'd been married for over 2 decades now, and there were still nights when Ethan looked at her and couldn't quite believe she'd stayed. One evening, sitting on the porch they'd rebuilt twice and reinforced 3 times, Mara said, "Do you have regrets?" "About what?" "Any of it. Sarah dying, marrying me, the struggle, all of it." Ethan thought about it, really thought about it. About the grief that had nearly destroyed him, about the desperation that had led him to answer an ad for a mail-order bride, about the years of barely surviving, the fires and failures, the constant fight to keep what they'd built. "No," he said finally, "I don't regret any of it, because all of it, even the worst parts, led here, to this, and I wouldn't trade this for anything." Mara leaned her head on his shoulder. "Even the parts where I was difficult?" "Especially those parts." She laughed, and the sound was the same one he'd fallen in love with all those years ago. Thomas took over most of the daily operations when Ethan's back finally gave out for good. The doctor said it was years of hard labor catching up, that there was nothing to be done except rest and accept that his working days were mostly behind him. Ethan hated it, hated sitting while others worked, hated feeling like a burden, hated the way his hands shook sometimes and his knees refused to bend right. But Sarah wouldn't let him wallow. She'd come find him every morning, drag him out to the barn, and make him sit while she worked, asking questions, getting his opinion, making him feel useful even when he couldn't do the physical labor anymore. "You're managing," Mara told him one day when he complained about being useless. "I'm sitting around." "You're teaching. You're guiding. That's just as important as the work itself." Doesn't feel like it. That's because you've spent your whole life measuring worth by how much you can carry. But worth isn't just about strength, Ethan. It's about wisdom. And you've got plenty of that to share. Lucy had 3 children by the time she was 30, 2 boys and a girl, and they ran wild on the property, chasing chickens and pestering the horses and driving everyone slightly insane. Eleanor came back from college for visits, full of stories about cases and law books and the injustices she was going to fix. The ranch continued to thrive under Thomas's management, with Sarah working as his second. David proved to be skilled at the business side, and between the 4 of them, Thomas, Sarah, Lucy, and David, they expanded the operation in ways Ethan had never imagined. Robert Donovan became a close partner and friend, and together they created a breeding program that was known across 3 states. The Hale name meant something now, meant quality, meant reliability, meant a legacy that would outlast the people who'd built it. Ethan was 63 when he had the dream. He was back at the beginning, standing in the post office in Carterville, holding that first letter from Mara. But this time, when he opened it, the words were different. They said, "You're going to be fine, all of you. You're going to make it." He woke with tears on his face and Mara beside him, her breathing soft and even. He lay there in the dark, listening to the sounds of the house, someone getting water in the kitchen, the creak of floorboards, the distant cry of one of the grandchildren, and felt a peace he'd never expected to find. They'd made it. Against every odd, through every disaster, they'd made it. Well, Mara got sick the winter Ethan turned 65. It started as a cough that wouldn't quit, then moved into her chest, and by February, the doctor was talking about pneumonia and rest and outcomes nobody wanted to hear. Ethan sat beside her bed, holding her hand, and felt the terror of possibly losing her claw at his throat. "You're not allowed to go," he said. "We had a deal." Mara smiled weakly. "Don't think death cares about our deals." "Then make it care. You're stubborn enough." "I'm tired, Ethan." "I know, but the girls need you. The grandkids need you. I need you." She squeezed his hand. "You'll be fine without me." "No, I won't, and I'm not ready to find out." Mara fought. She fought the way she'd fought everything, with grit and refusal to quit, and by April she was back on her feet, thinner and weaker, but alive. Ethan had never been more grateful for her stubbornness in his life. They celebrated their 25th anniversary in May, surrounded by children and grandchildren and friends who'd become family. Someone had set up tables in the yard, and there was more food than they could possibly eat, and the sound of laughter filled the air. Thomas stood up to make a speech, his son on his knee, and talked about what Ethan and Mara had built, not just a ranch, but a family, a legacy, a place where people who'd been broken could be whole again. "They taught us that family isn't just blood," Thomas said. "It's choice. It's showing up. It's fighting for each other when the world tries to tear you apart. And I'm grateful every day that they chose to fight for me and Lucy when they had every reason not to." Lucy was crying, and Sarah was grinning, and Eleanor was taking notes like she was going to turn this into a legal argument somehow. Ethan looked at Mara, and she looked back, and they didn't need to say anything. It was all there in the look, the journey, the struggle, the love that had grown in the spaces between survival and surrender. The years that followed were quieter. Ethan's body continued to betray him. His hearing went, his vision got worse. His hands developed a tremor he couldn't control. But his mind stayed sharp, and he spent his days sitting on the porch, watching his family work the land he'd fought so hard to keep, and feeling a satisfaction that went bone deep. Mara stayed beside him, her own body worn but her spirit undiminished. They'd talk for hours about nothing important, memories, grandchildren, the price of grain, and sometimes they'd just sit in comfortable silence, holding hands like they were afraid to let go. One evening, as the sun set over the land they'd built their life on, Mara said, "We did all right, didn't we?" Ethan looked out at the ranch, at the barns and fences, at the horses in the pasture, at the houses where their children lived, at the grandchildren playing in the yard. He thought about the scared, desperate man he'd been when this started, about the wary woman who'd stepped off a coach with nothing but a trunk and a wall around her heart. "Yeah," he said, "we did more than all right. We did something most people never manage." "What's that?" "We built a life worth living. And we did it together." Mara smiled, and in the fading light, Ethan could still see the girl she'd been, the woman she'd become, and everything in between. Together, she repeated. That's always been the secret, hasn't it? Not doing it alone. Yeah, I think it is. They sat there as the sky turned from gold to red to purple, and Ethan thought about legacy, not the kind that came from money or land, but the kind that lived in the people you loved, in the choices they made, in the way they carried forward the lessons you taught them. Sarah would run this place someday with the same fierce determination Mara had shown. Eleanor would change laws and fight for people who couldn't fight for themselves. Thomas would continue to innovate and grow what they'd started. Lucy would keep the family together the way she always had. And the grandchildren, they'd carry it all forward, building on the foundation Ethan and Mara had laid, creating something new while honoring what had come before. That was legacy. Not perfection, not some fairy tale ending where everything worked out smoothly, but survival, adaptation. The stubborn refusal to quit even when quitting would be easier. Ethan had learned something in all these years, something he wished he could tell his younger self, the man who'd lost everything and thought there was no path forward. Pain doesn't disqualify you from happiness. Broken things can be remade into something stronger. And sometimes the best parts of life come from the worst circumstances, if you're brave enough to keep building when everything tells you to give up. He squeezed Mara's hand and she squeezed back, and they sat there together as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Two people who'd started as strangers and become each other's home, watching the world they'd created continue on without needing them to hold it up anymore. And that, Ethan thought, was as close to peace as anyone had a right to expect.